There is no such day where you put in your plan book, we're going to have the racial consciousness event. Rather, if I'm seeking to develop the racial consciousness, the racial literacy of students, I'm talking about race all the time. So every book I pick up is an opportunity to talk about race. Who's here? Who's not? Who's invisible? Who's not? Who's allowed to speak? When we look statistically at the United States of America, the kids who are most often left out of curriculum and left out of opportunity in school are Black and brown children. If there were any curriculum at school or curricular approach or pedagogy that led to the mass failure of children with green eyes, we would not run around our school communities criminalizing and blaming kids with green eyes. Rather, we would change the instructional practice. But in America, we are slow to extend those same graces to our children of color or to children from other marginalized groups. When we think about how we eradicate school-based racism, it's not about changing my feelings, my heart, my mind, that's part of it, but really it's examining the everyday choices that I make and the impact that those everyday choices have on specific groups of kids. Because I'm a reading teacher, books give me an excellent opportunity to discuss race. No book has ever been written devoid of a conversation on race. Even if I'm holding a book with all white characters in it, that is a statement on race that author has attempted to construct a version of normal that exists without people of color, and we can talk about that in a classroom. One of the things that books do is books craft a world for kids where they can understand what is normal. So if the only people that show up in my books are white heterosexual folks, then that becomes my idea of who's normal. I, as the teacher who ushers kids into books, get to challenge that, oh, let's look at how this family is constructed in this book, and let's look at how this family is constructed in this other book. What are the similarities? What are the differences? What does that teach us about what a family can be? Oh, we've now learned that a family can be this or this. Those are the kinds of conversations that we can have with kids, because those are the kinds of conversations that are going to lead to greater humanity. As a species, humans have always been defined by story. When we think about early humans, right? We have evidence that they told stories because we've seen their cave drawings. And so, at some point in our history, an early human left the cave and got mauled by a saber-toothed tiger, right? And so somebody inside the cave had to depict that so that the next person wouldn't go out and suffer the same fate, right? And so I've got to invite stories into the classroom that give us possibility, stories into the classroom that give us the ability to see things in different ways or perspectives. I've got to invite stories into the classroom that challenge our ideas of what normal can be, because if I am not inviting those stories into the classroom, I'm denying kids not just access to their own ancestral understandings, but I'm denying kids access to the potential for who they can be moving forward. I am a book person, right? I'm a person who has chosen to dedicate my life to reading and writing with young people. And books for me have been an escape. At other points in my life, books have been a vision for the future. It's been a blueprint for who I want to be, what I want to be, how I want to be. And then at other points in my life, books have been my entertainment, right? Sometimes things get pretty boring and I want to be able to turn to books as a source of excitement or books as a source of wonder. And so I think as we engage kids in conversations about race, it's important to continue to see books in all of those different ways. Just because we're talking about books, just because we're talking about race, doesn't mean that we can't have fun and walk into this reality that we are using the same books that make us smile, that make us laugh, that make us wonder, in order to smile and laugh and wonder about the things that make us different and about the things that unite us. So I'm holding one of my absolute favorite books. If I were introducing this book in a classroom, one of the things that I would do with children is I would explore this beautiful art. So before we start reading any of the words, I just want to take a time to literally inhale the beauty of this book. So I want to show kids, oh my gosh, look at this picture. I mean, oh, the hair. I wish I could do hair like this. I'm really working on it. And then I'm turning through and just look at the amazing illustrations here. She lives in a building just like ours, and she's reading a book just like us. Like there's so many ways that this young person is exactly like us. And as I flip through this book, maybe you name those ways. Like what are the ways that she's just like us? And maybe we'll even discover some ways that she's a little different than us. Oh my gosh, look at her. Oh, it seems like she's going into a classroom or something and she looks a little nervous. Sometimes we get nervous too, so she's just like us. And there's lots of people in her class, some people who are different than her and different than us. There's the lunchroom and somebody is sitting all alone. Like I know that feeling. It's been a lot of years since I had that feeling, but I definitely know that feeling, and some of you know that feeling too. So maybe we can learn something. And so before we start reading these words, like I'm just gonna pause here and I just want you to quickly like turn to a friend, and I'm only gonna give you 15 seconds. I just want you to think, what are some questions that I might have about this book? So I'm counting to 15 seconds to think. Now go. I just want you to turn to your friend, blurt out all the questions you have. Why do they eat their ice cream like that? Why do they hold their architecture like that? Why do they make their art like that? Like, why do they daydream like that? All the questions you have, go ahead and ask all those questions. We don't even need to have the answers because we'll probably discover them when we read together. And so that's just a quick intro, right? Like, how I might intro this to a group of kids. And you saw me leaning into this idea that this book is full of people who are like us, people who are not like us. And so I simply allow those questions to live. So many times adults silence kid questions. That when kids have a question about race or about class or about gender, we're like, shh, don't ask that now. And I really want to champion that. Yes, do ask that now, because this is a classroom and this is where we make meaning and this is where we make sense of those things. That I think it's important for everybody to know that if we don't create the space to answer the questions in class, kids will find the space outside of class where there is misinformation and fake news. And I don't want them to go down that path. So I am willing and excited to always carry that responsibility inside my classroom. One of the things that I'm always thinking about as a parent and as an educator is I'm thinking about how am I raising and teaching kids that have a nuanced racial literacy. So when I'm reading books with 4-year-olds, I am not breaking down the history of white supremacy or the history of how racialized or racist ideas have emerged over time. Rather, I simply want kids to understand that there are differences, and those differences over time have taken on different social meanings, and I want to educate them out of that, right? So I want kids to understand that we can notice difference without assigning value. And kids can't do that unless I give them practice, right? So I want to invite kids to have conversations about who they see in books and how those people are the same or different and what they can learn from those people. Because what happens, and here's what we know happens in America far too often, that our communities and our homes, for the most part in America, are just as segregated as they were in 1954. And so I'm providing kids a blueprint and I'm providing kids language by exposing them to different characters in books. That kids can develop a healthy reverence for people that they've never met by beginning to empathize with them in the pages of a book. And I think that that's really important. It's important that kids begin to develop a concept of who they are in communities of people. And so I really enjoy finding books that are going to help kids to feel seen and affirmed and heard, and finding books that are going to help kids to feel valuable. That it's always beautiful to take out a book that has Black characters in it, or characters who speak Spanish, or characters who speak Chinese, and watch kids sit up a little straighter that day. So if I want kids to be an astronaut, I find an astronaut book. But if I want kids to be racially literate and sensitive and thoughtful, I can find books that also pop those things out. And just like we know how to point to the picture of the astronaut in the book and say, you can be just like this, I can also point to the picture of the Asian child in the book and say to the white child that you can also be just like this, just as sensitive, just as powerful, just as thoughtful, and or to point at the Black child in the book and say to the Southeast Asian child that you can be just like this, just as amazing, just as incredible, just as creative. And that way kids begin to see that we're not just talking about race here, what we're talking about is possibility. And that's a powerful thing.